Hi. Okay. So this is another mom vlog. And in this one, I'm not going to be asking any questions. I'm not going to be hawking any of my little bee, which I still enjoy. Sorry, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to talk about something a little bit more serious and hope that if I could reach a person who's going through this, then it would make my life better. Maybe that's why I got a degree in psychology. I'm going to talk to you about postpartum depression. And more specifically, I had postpartum depression and a form of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which up until the point that I had it, I thought was only for people who went to war, which is what I think most people think. So it's not, post-traumatic stress disorder is not necessarily a, you're in a car accident, so you twitch about being in the car or anything like that. Post-traumatic stress is when stress has been put on you for such a prolonged amount of time that that's what you expect, if that makes any sense. I can't really describe it better than that. To give a little bit of preface for that, I have two conditions, two blood clotting disorders essentially, factor 2 and MTHFR. I would use the nickname for MTHFR, but I will let you use your own brain and pick up what MTHFR means to you. I'll probably put the actual links so that you can look up the disorders. They're both basically, they make it difficult to get pregnant and they make it even more difficult to stay pregnant. The stillborn rate in MTHFR is extremely high, or higher than normal. I'm not going to say extremely high because it's not like 1 in every 2, and I think that's extreme. But it is higher than in normal instance, and thus you're put at a high-risk pregnancy, and I was put as a high-risk pregnancy at 20 weeks, which is a little bit of pressure. But the real pressure started for me at 32 weeks when I had to go in twice a week and have fetal heart monitoring, where they would put on my belly a pink band and a blue band, and they would make sure that my son's heart was beating and that I wasn't having contractions. And during the time, I kind of made it into a joke, and I laughed about it, and I didn't let myself think about it as much as I probably should have, because I didn't want to process the fact that every Monday and Thursday I'd go into a room and they would make sure that my son's heart was beating and that it was beating properly. More than once they had to jolt him to wake him up because his heart wasn't beating as fast as they would like it to be, or they would try to make me drink juice or shift my position or do any of those things. I also would have fetal growth monitoring, which was once a month. I got to have a sonogram, which was amazing. I mean, getting to watch your child grow literally week by week was great. But again, it was to confirm that he wasn't stopped growing. He hadn't stopped growing. And so from 32 weeks to 39 weeks when he was born, I spent every day hoping that I'd feel him kicking and hoping that he was fine. He turned out to be fine. He was fine. Perfect. His APGAR score, which I have still no idea what it means, but I know that this is a good score, is 8.9. Was 8.9. He was 5 pounds and 13 ounces, even though he was full term. So they think my placenta wasn't proper. And then the real fun began, having a child. And there is something called the baby blues that is common for almost all women, where you feel overwhelmed and exhausted and your hormone level is completely funked, and so you spend a lot of time sad because you feel like, what did I do? I had this life and now I have this new life to take care of, and it's overwhelming and it's stressful. So baby blues is a very common disorder, and that's what I thought I had. Baby blues come and go for women. I noticed I started having a problem when I couldn't leave him. Like, I would go, like, my husband would be holding him in the living room, and he would be an amazing person and say, go to sleep for a while. And I would go into the room and I might fall asleep for 5 minutes, and then I think I'd hear him, and I would just, my adrenaline would start pumping, and I'd run back out. He'd still be asleep, my husband would still be fine, but I couldn't handle being away from him. I couldn't put him down. I would cry pretty much all the time over nothing. Every time I was in the shower, I was crying. Every time I sat and thought about it, whenever I was alone with him, I didn't want to be alone with him because I knew I was going to do something wrong. And I was scared that people were going to think that I was such a bad mom because of this. I'd wanted a child for my entire life. I was 27 years old, and from the time I was 6, I was imagining having a family. And then I was given a family, and I know a lot of people who can't have families or who want them and can't have them yet. And I should be thankful, and all I was feeling was scared and lonely and angry in a way because I wasn't feeling right. And I don't know how to describe it to people who don't have it. I do suffer depression beforehand, so I did have a indicator that I would have postpartum depression, but it only made it like a little bit more likely. But the overwhelming feeling was being alone, that I was alone in this. My husband got to leave to go to work and to go to school. My mom got to leave to go home. I had to stay here, and I had to protect him. And half of me loved him, and half of me feared what was going on. And I had such fear that I felt resentment. And that makes you feel horrible. What kind of parent resents their child? What kind of parent doesn't want to be around their child because they know they're going to screw up? I can remember even as far back as the first night in the hospital, one of the nurses came in, and Henry had a problem with his with breastfeeding in general, which again made me feel like a failure. I was a failure. I couldn't take care of my child properly because he couldn't latch on, but he had a small mouth and was weak. And then they gave him formula, and it made his stomach hurt, and I couldn't comfort him because he was hurting, and he was 12 hours old, and there's just nothing you can do sometimes with babies like that. And this nurse came in, and she held him, and she rubbed his stomach, and she rubbed his back, and he felt better, and he fell asleep. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, maybe this woman should take care of him. She would be able to take care of him better than I can. I can't take care of him. I bet you started this video thinking you were going to see me cry. You were right. But, so it's this scary time that no one talks about. And everyone looks at you like, oh, a new baby, isn't that amazing? Isn't that the best thing that's ever happened to you? And it is, but it doesn't feel like that sometimes at first. And I didn't talk to anyone about this because I didn't want people to think of me as a bad person. And it took 6 weeks before both my husband and my mother kind of had to have an intervention with me because of how I was handling things. I would get so overwhelmed and so stressed that I would shut down completely. And not do anything. I would hold him when he cried, but I could be holding anyone's baby. It wasn't allowing me to connect with my child. And so then I started really going in. I went into a therapist. In the first 3 sessions, I just cried the entire time. I know, it's such a shock. And then we started talking, and it was an hour a week where I had to leave my son, and I was allowed to say the things that most mothers won't say to you. Most mothers won't say to you, "This is scary," or "I don't know what I'm doing," or "Why didn't I think about this beforehand?" Because they think it'll make them a bad parent. But I think it's something that you need to know, that occasionally you're going to feel scared, and there's no miracle thing that's going to come upon you. You're not going to get a shot of mom adrenaline. You're just going to have to figure things out. But the most key thing is that you are not alone. That you are not alone in this. If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel scared, if you feel like you're the worst mother on the planet because you don't 100% 24 hours a day look at your child and think, "This is the greatest moment of my life," you're not alone in that. Other people feel that way. And the best way to do this is to talk to someone. I ended up on medication for anxiety and for depression. That doesn't make you a weaker person. That makes you a human who needs some help. It's not long term, it's not permanent. I read books. I'd highly recommend reading Brooke Shields' Down Came the Rain. I think that's what it's called. It's Brooke Shields' book. You just go into Barnes & Noble and ask about it. It's helpful to hear other people talk about it. Another book is called It Sucked and I Cried. She actually had it a lot worse than me. But yeah, I just want people to know that this is not a bad thing. That this is not, well, it's a bad thing, but it's not a abnormal thing. It's something that happens to people. And if you know someone who has postpartum, the best thing to do is not to necessarily tell them that they're the best parent ever, because sometimes it's hard to hear that because you don't feel like it. But sometimes the best thing to do is just listen and let them tell you what they're feeling and not judge them and not feel like, wow, people think this, because yeah, people think it, and as long as they're not showing signs of hurting themselves or hurting their children, it's just emotions you can't hide, emotions you can't bottle up. So yeah, I just talked to you for 15 minutes about this. I'm sorry. I just figured I needed to get it out there somewhere.